Hello, Colin here with Halifax Motorsports, and today I'd like to discuss chain tension, why it's important for you to follow the manufacturer's recommendations, what happens when you run it too loose or too tight, what to look for to determine whether or not your chain and sprockets are worn and need to be changed, if you can change them as a set or they need to be matched, and just some basic guidelines for chain maintenance to ensure you get the longest life out of your components. So with that said, we're going to turn the camera around, focus it on the motorcycle, and go through a few things. So before we measure the chain tension, we need to look at the manual and see where the reference point for measuring is. This is an 05R1, and the reference point in the manual suggests that we measure it pretty well right where the rear set is. If you measure it further up or further back, the measurement's not going to be accurate. Obviously 2 inches right here is different than 2 inches way back here. So that's step one. Find out where the reference point is, then grab your ruler or calipers or whatever you're going to use for measuring. Doesn't have to be super precise, but fairly close. The manual says that I need to be between 1 1/4 and 1 3/4 inches of free play on the chain, and it says the motorcycle must be upright with no weight on it. So right now we're setting on a rear stand, which sets the motorcycle upright, and there's nobody sitting on the bike. So we're gonna position the ruler so that it's on one of the chain links, and we're gonna pull the chain down pretty well as far as we can pull it. Not with excessive force, but some firm pressure. So now we've got that set to 0 on the ruler. We will pull it up with the same amount of force, and as you can see there, I'm just over 1.5 inches. So you wanna do that in a few different spots in the chain. They'll tell you to do that at the loosest spot. So just go through and make sure there's no tight spots where maybe you only have 1 inch or you're either under or over the acceptable limit that's outlined in the manual. And that's going to ensure you've got the proper chain tension. So now let's talk about the reasons that chain tension is so important. We've got our swing arm here, which is what the rear wheel is attached to. We've got our chain adjustment blocks and obviously chain and sprockets. The swing arm pivots on a pivot point further up here. Where this sits right now is going to be a different chain tension than when the swing arm is fully extended, that being no weight on the bike, or fully extended the opposite way, up this way, which is going to make the chain even tighter yet. The distance between here and here is going to change depending on where this swings. So the manual is giving you a measurement basically to set it so that when it's fully compressed, when your suspension is fully compressed, the chain is not going to have too much tension on it that is going to put excess pressure on the bearings for your wheel, and most importantly, the bearing for the output shaft on your transmission. If you run the chain too tight, you run the likelihood of tearing the bearings out of your transmission, which is an extremely expensive thing to replace. The bearings in the wheel, not so bad, obviously, but on top of that, you're not going to get full suspension travel. You're limiting your suspension travel based on the chain slack. Obviously, you're going to wear out your sprockets and chain sooner because of the extra load put on it, and again, you risk damaging engine components. So very important to have, if you're going to err on the side of loose or tight, on the side of loose. So how do you know when your chain and sprockets are worn to the point of needing replacement? A good benchmark is a brand new motorcycle. If you go look at a new bike, you'll notice that the sprockets are squared off at all the teeth. So they don't come to a point, they're more, obviously I can't do it with my hands real good, but they're square at the top. Once they start to get pointy, it's time to change your sprocket and chain, preferably as a set, most likely on a street bike. I've run dirt bikes with aluminum sprockets where halfway through the season the sprocket gets chewed up because it's in such a harsh, dusty, sandy, rocky environment, and I've got no problem just changing the sprocket in a case like that. You should be monitoring your chain and sprocket all the time. I like to clean mine a few times a year just using some Varsol and a toothbrush. I use the maximum chain wax. Everybody's going to have their own personal preference and opinions as to what's best, but as long as you're using a good chain lube that's O-ring safe, you're going to be okay. The chain, when assembled at the factory, has grease applied in between all the pins and links and clips. So the chain wax is only there to protect the surface from surface corrosion and apply a little bit of lubrication in between all the rollers and the sprocket itself. So it doesn't need to be caked on. You don't have to apply it to the point where it's flinging off everywhere. Once a chain is nice and clean, give it a little bit of time to dry off and then apply your chain wax and probably let it sit for the night. That way it'll gunk up a little bit and it won't wipe off or fling off the next time you go to ride. You should be seeing or checking your chain stretch once your tension has been set. And if you come up to your rear chain and sprocket, you should be able to grab the links, give them a good tug, and the chain shouldn't easily pull away from the sprocket. A little bit of movement obviously is what you want, but you don't want it to be able to easily pull away. The next thing you should be looking at is your master link. This particular link is a rivet type. They also come in a clip variety, which in my opinion is just as good. Both of them need to be checked frequently. In my opinion, the final drive for your motorcycle is just as important as the brakes. If you lose a chain or jump the chain off your sprocket, you're likely to lock up your rear wheel, and chances are you're going to crash the bike. So this is a very critical part of the motorcycle, and something that if you maintain well is going to last you a very, very long time. I like to clean mine a few times a year, but as soon as it starts to look grubby and dirty and coated in some unwanted material, it's a good time to clean it off and give it a good lubrication. Hopefully I've left you with a few good tips and guidelines for properly maintaining your chain and keeping a reliable drivetrain on your motorcycle. You won't be robbing excess power, putting undue stress on your transmission bearings or wheel bearings by running it too tight, and most importantly, you're going to keep a reliable motorcycle. It's just as important, in my opinion, as checking your brake fluid, looking at your brake pads, checking the oil every now and then, something that you should be continually maintaining and looking at on your motorcycle. It's a cheap way to keep your motorcycle reliable and get some longevity out of your components. So until next time.